welcome to another edition of Meet the Solutionaries for Green TV. I am Betsy Rosenberg and very pleased to introduce my next guest who actually reached out to me. And because it has to do with all the fires that are burning right now, I decided let's get it while it's hot, so to speak. I like to get things that are connected to the news. And Mike Roddy is a longtime home builder working in construction who retired, he thought, but then went back, he says, because he was so concerned about all the fires burning and all the rebuilding going on and rebuilding with lumber, something that Mike feels is not the right material to be using, especially in these very heated times. So I said, that's a good story right now, because everywhere you look, there's fires burning and from London to California and in between. We're certainly melting, heat records right now. And so there's bound to be more, not less, of these fires that seem to be spontaneous and seem to be more difficult to put out and cause more damage than ever. So welcome to the program, Mike.
Well, my dream a while ago was to rebuild in Paradise after the fire that appeared there a few years ago. And it was a similar situation that I've observed before. And that was that after 90% of an entire city burned down and over 100 people died, the timber industry sent out people to comfort them and say, we're going to take care of you. And all kinds of suppliers popped up saying, we're going to give you good prices on 2x4s and 2x6s, because they fear the presence of companies that can build houses that don't burn down so easily. And it's pretty easy to prove that based on data. And as one example, about 210 people every year die of house fires in Italy. In America, it's 4,200 people die every year from house fires. And the only thing that's different is that they don't allow wood construction. And that's actually true in most of the world. These facts are rarely established or even considered in our media companies. And even when steel at certain situations has been able to match lumber framing prices, this kind of little house on the prairie, whatever comfort they feel in having 2x4 walls, has managed to continue to keep their market share. I'm still going to battle, but I paid for a long advertisement in the local magazine that went out to everyone, and still have not gotten a call. I'm not going to give up for a while, but it's kind of a mystery.
Well, what did the ad say? What are you offering?
They don't say anything. They kind of like drift toward the contractors and builders who are surrounding them and saying, we're going to take care of you. We're going to close the eaves. We're going to use fire resistant roofs and walls. But what happened in the case of the campfire in Paradise during the fires was, all it takes is one entry point to ignite an entire house. And examples of that were some of the people actually were aware of the fires and had their houses built with concrete block walls around the perimeter. But they used interior wood studs and often flammable roofs. So, and instead of having everything burned down, the walls remained and the rest of the house burned down. So what we propose to do is to avoid anything except Class A fire rated materials. And that means that whatever we build with is not going to catch fire. Now, you would think that would be popular, but for some reason that I cannot fathom, it has not caught on. And I went to a city council meeting in Paradise, and one of the members said, how do we know that your houses won't catch fire? After I'd already explained that steel doesn't burn and concrete doesn't burn, nor do the other components that we use.
Are there any disadvantages to using light steel?
That's a difficult question because it pretty easily mimics wood. Instead of 16 inches apart, they're 2 feet apart because a steel stud is stronger. You can vary the tensile strength and the finish any way you want. And of course, it's often used in commercial buildings. And it does not have an advantage when it comes to heat transmission, but it doesn't have a disadvantage either. And that's based on studies done by NAHB that over a several year period.
So you were using light steel the last couple of decades of your home building career?
Yeah, about 500,000 steel frame houses were built in the United States. And I built about, over 600 of them. And they're still standing, and they can be expected to last for centuries. The average American house lasts for 60 years, even if it doesn't burn down,
And you say
due
there's,
to termite, rot, things like that.
in addition to the burnability, if you will, of homes made from lumber, from wood, you say there's other problems with wood, such as chemicals that are put in them.
Yeah, this began about 25 years ago when it was hard to find large diameter timber in order to be able to make actual wood pieces like 2x4s and 2x6s. So a lot of the components in a wood frame house, whether it's plywood oriented strand board or various other elements that are used for strength because they're straighter, contain glue, and the glue is called formaldehyde, and it's extremely toxic when burned.
Mm.
It's a banned product in most of the world, and flooring too, but we allow it here.
And of course, the climate is changing for the worse, getting hotter. So it seems like using wood is a double problem. On the one hand, you're saying that the buildings are more combustible, less safe for inhabitants and for the structure of the home, lasting through a fire. And it's also not good to be killing trees for lumber because they're soaking up, carbon dioxide, absorbing CO2. And that's what we need more of, more trees. The world is racing to plant more trees, and they're being cut down for homes when you're saying they don't have to be.
Yeah, well, that's a good question, but a good way to address it is to go to the IPCC reports. The carbon footprint of steel is about 128 million tons per year. The carbon footprint of lumber is about 420 million tons per year. And the reason is lumber is not very much of the lumber that goes back into the ground when there's a fire or when trees die and ends up in a house. Maybe 15 or 20% of it does because of all the waste. And then, of course, going back into the soil. But another interesting statistic is that about the mortality rate of trees in the United States is about 3%. For many years, it never exceeded 2%. And that's because we've destroyed 93% of our native forests, and the smaller forests that remain just are not as healthy, and there's more waste when they produce lumber and 2x4s. That's why they use these chemical components to mimic what wood used to be.
And does the lumber industry have no interest in preserving their, the main part of their business? It seems like they would be concerned about continuing to just use so much lumber for housing when, we're going to have to make it last, even if they're not concerned about climate change, which of course everybody on Earth should be.
They don't care about the environment. They're still massively clear cutting. And as long as there's more trees to be cut, that's what they're going to do. That's their business plan.
Till there's none left or one left, as Lorax would tell us, the Lorax story. It's not a cautionary tale. It's spread far enough, apparently.
Yeah. And those reasons, by the way, when I was referring to longevity, resistance to insects and all that, that's one of the biggest reasons why very few countries overseas build with lumber. It's a banned product in most of the world. Pick a country and ask if they build their houses out of 2x4s, and you'll get a look of puzzlement.
One of the materials that someone on our team asked about is hempcrete. You said that's not something you know a lot about, but based on what you know about hemp, do you think that is a viable option material?
I'm not well versed enough in the subject to give an intelligent answer to it. I do recall that up in the Northwest California, hempcrete was proposed as a construction material, and I have no problem with it. But I'm not well versed enough to really give a good answer.
You might want to look into that too, to add to your offerings, in addition to light gauge steel, since it is so earth friendly, hemp.
Yeah, I know it has a lot of good qualities. It grows quickly. It has a good strength to weight ratio. But I'd like to see more of them. And I don't know why it didn't catch on in Northwest California, but I wish that would have happened. It's
Maybe
just so easy and so cheap to go down to the lumber store and spend $3 a piece on 2x4s. People get used to it.
Yeah, well, cheap and easy is part of the reason we got here to this place that we're in, this planetary pickle, because cheap and easy and convenience clashes with conservation and the long-term view. Very interesting what you're doing. You're trying to rebuild your, so to speak, rebuild your business because there's so many more fires and so many more people just automatically rebuilding in places that perhaps they shouldn't, but also rebuilding with the wrong materials in your view.
Yeah. I'd love to be able to rebuild there, but I'm an older guy. I'm comfortably retired, and I don't feel like butting heads with the timber industry up there if it looks like I'm not getting anywhere. I'll know in about 6 months whether we're going to succeed, because in order for steel to succeed, we would build a warehouse, pre-assemble the walls and the trusses, reduce labor time, because labor actually takes up more of the budget than the materials when it comes to framing,
So,
and see what happens.
so who are you looking to for support? It wouldn't be the lumber industry because, like you said, they've got a vested interest in continuing the status quo.
Mm-hmm. I've been an enemy of the timber industry for many years and have written articles attacking them. It's odd because I actually kind of have a friendly relationship with them too.
So when you say you'll know more, who are you asking for support from? Like what entities, what kind of partnerships do you need to really make this viable?
We would need to get a substantial amount of cash to be able to produce steel framing that would pretty easily match the cost of wood framing. And that seems to be the main obstacle right now. The cost of steel framing as is would probably add about 3, possibly 4% to the total hard costs of a house. But here's how we would really take the market if the insurance companies cooperated. House insurance in America, even for a small town like that with small houses, is about $2,000 a year. And nice areas like the Bay Area, it's 2 or 3 times that. Our house in Alameda is about $5,000 a year. We also have an apartment in Paris that's large, 2.5 bedrooms. Our annual insurance premium is 560 euros. And out of that, most of that's for water damage, liability, and theft, because it's never going to burn down. It's made of concrete and steel, including the window cranks and the roofs.
So are you looking for support from insurance companies or the industry?
No,
Are you looking for investors as well?
I'm looking for investors that would enable us, which I believe we can accomplish, to match or defeat wood in the marketplace.
And are there prospects out there? Are you getting receptivity?
I'm getting some interest, but I don't have the cash yet because we're going to need about $2.5 million to pull that off and defeat lumber and the WI. But if we do, I would suggest your listeners and yourself take a look at the forests in the Pacific Northwest and Northern California and see how badly degraded they are from clear cutting and failed tree planting. And it's just not what it used to be. And they're attacking it as ferociously as they always have.
And is that an area where they are using more trees for lumber than other parts of the country? Is that why you mention it?
Yeah. Northern California, Oregon, and Washington are the main sources of construction lumber in the Western United States. But we used to get a lot of boards from British Columbia, but British Columbia just had ferocious fires which burned down a big portion of their timber inventory. It was unstoppable, and I don't know how many millions of acres it was, but it was kind of devastated. And this is a result not only of small trees and hotter microclimates, because big trees and mature forests have much cooler microclimates, but also global warming. So there's mutual feedback loops that are going to result in a lot of forests becoming savanna. And part of what we like to do is to restore our existing forests and do the best we can to prevent or at least reduce that occurrence.
And I don't recall exactly when it was, but some months ago, it was so hot, and I think the Vancouver area that an entire town burned down.
Yeah,
in the heat.
well, all through the province.
Yeah, and that's not normal for that part of the world.
Well, I spent time in British Columbia, and if you if you get on Zoom and you can find a way to look at what's left of British Columbia, they clear cut, they don't replant. Their clear cuts can be a mile or two long, and they're so far from public view because most of British Columbia is empty that even a lot of British Columbians don't know about it.
Mm.
So a lot of their resources now are being turned into paper and cardboard. They're struggling with trees that are big enough to be able to produce quality lumber, and they're already starting to produce engineered wood themselves. They've lost a lot of their big trees from logging. They log even more aggressively than the United States, where we make some effort to set areas aside. Their clear cuts are much larger, and their logging practices are more devastating. But it continues, and we can't do anything about British Columbia. I'd like to see what we can do about what we can accomplish here in the Northwest and figure out a way to no longer have to destroy forests to build with lumber.
And when you go into communities, assuming you have, like Paradise, that's been devastated by fires, and you see people planning to rebuild or in the process of rebuilding, do you talk to them about, hey, maybe using lumber is not such a great idea? I would think that they would be most receptive, people who've actually been through a fire. And what kind of responses do you get if you're trying to intervene at that level?
You would think so. But as an example, I went at the beginning of the Paradise Fire several years ago. I went to all the city council meetings. I was never allowed to speak. Everybody in the city council kind of assumed we were going to rebuild with lumber. They held another huge meeting in an auditorium with photos of the houses that they'd hired an Pennsylvania architect to rebuild with, and they were all wood. So there's vested interest there, and the people never having seen, in most cases, what a steel framing building looks like, was actually identical to what a wood frame building looks like. They just decided to revert to what they were used to, especially since out in the country, especially, everybody's got wood tools in their garage. They're used to banging 2x4s together, and it's not easy to make that change. And it's a shame that they can't foresee that even if they close the eaves and try to use more fire rated components, that there's a good chance it's going to burn down again. But
not to mention the fact that the more trees we don't have, the more CO2 is going to be in the atmosphere. Like, are they just not connecting the dots at all?
Yeah, it is in the grass, but it's nowhere near the volume that you have in mature trees that are sequestered. And that doesn't even, when you chop down a forest, it takes about 12 years before there's any net sequestration at all. And until that point, trees are small and spindly, and there's whatever CO2 is sequestered is not significant. It's offset by other factors.
So given you have a message to get out, which resonates with me, certainly someone who's steeped in the dangers of climate change and hearing about all these plant a tree programs, urgently plant a tree, and we're cutting down trees to use lumber to build homes that are more susceptible to fire. It seems like a no-brainer. So what would you like to see our viewers do after watching this interview, if they're concerned and agree with you, even if they're not building a home?
Yeah, well, I really appreciate your questions and your invitation and your interest in what we're trying to do. And there are other people out there like us. But if we're going to point fingers, we have to put more pressure on general contractors and architects, because they have it in their heads that if it's a few percent more for a house that's safe and it's going to last for 500 years, that it's worth it. But they're set in their ways. They have certain rhythms and schedules and subcontractors they're used to. And it's a big, complicated deal to build a house anyway. So in most cases, they don't want to bother. But that's going to change because of the velocity of the fires that have been occurring lately and the damage to our forests that's happened too. I think it'll happen, if not in my lifetime, and very soon after.
it seems that we're operating on so many levels, in our old world back then, and the world has changed, the climate has changed a lot of it. Politics has devolved. We have so many different factors that we have to think newly, creatively, for the future, not the past, and certainly not just because we've always done it this way.
I agree. That's well said.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the information. You've enlightened me. I was not aware of this. Great option. And we'll continue to keep it in our mind. And I wish you luck. I don't know that we're going to bring in as many investors as you might hope, but we certainly have people who are watching us who care deeply. And so perhaps somebody out there will contact you.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed our conversation. I can be reached at mike.greenframe@gmail.com.
Wonderful. And we hope you'll let people know about Green TV as well. We're a startup and we don't have much of a marketing budget. It's just word of mouth, but we're committed to bringing these conversations to a wider, public, because the news networks that I've pitched, they're not interested in doing anything on solutions. And if not us, who? So we're a team of dedicated environmentalists and journalists and production people, but no marketing budget or staff. So please help us spread the word.
Sounds good. And I'm never going to give up.
I will match you on that. This is 25 years I've been doing this. And when you get to know too much, there's just no option but to keep going. So we're trying to make Green TV, a viable channel where everybody can tune in to raise their eco IQ on a range of subjects from A to Z, all of them critically important. I don't know what news is more compelling than how we're going to save ourselves and get people to wake up and smell the carbon so we can get off our gases and give our kids and grandkids, who I heard in the background in the beginning of the interview, a livable planet. And certainly that, and maybe even an environment which they can thrive. They deserve that. Everybody does. We got it. We kind of messed it up, our generation. So let's do what we can while we're still here.
That's right. Let's keep battling.
All right. Fight on. Go
Bye-bye.
forth and greenify. Thanks so much, Mike, Roddy. Appreciate the interview. And again, if you would like to subscribe to Green TV, know that you will be getting us ever closer to our 1,000 subscribers. YouTube says once we hit that, we're about halfway there. We get to start live streaming, which will allow us to bring you much more programming. So please go like us on our greentv.com YouTube channel and subscribe there. And we will thank you for that. Okay, thanks so much.